Thanks for tuning in to Wine Blast. Sign up to Wine Blast Plus for first-class subscriber-only content to access our full archive, support the show and get every episode before it goes on free release. You'll also get subscriber-only discounts with the likes of Corvin, Jancis Robinson Glassware and Academy du Vin Library. Just visit wineblast.co.uk or click the link in the show notes. Hello, you're listening to Wine Blast with me, Susie Barry, and my husband and fellow master of wine, Peter Richards. And we all need to buckle up because we are heading back out on the road, this time to visit the intriguing Adelaide Hills wine region in South Australia. It gets talked about a lot, but what is it really all about?
Yes, hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us as we go on another Wine Blast jaunt into wine country. You may need to bring a jumper, because we're going cool climate, and you definitely need to ready a glass or two because these are some seriously exciting wines. Here's a taster of what's coming up.
There's a discovery around every corner. Every pocket tells a story in a way. I think people, they don't want to drink like their dads. They want to try new things.
It's too good not to go. It's too, it's too accessible. It's too beautiful. It's too diverse. You can't not go.
There is this place called the Adelaide Hills, and it's producing these wonderful, thought-provoking wines.
Too good not to check out. Pete Saturno, Kelly Wellington and Brian Crozer there. We'll be hearing more from them as well as other leading Adelaide Hills wine producers in the course of the programme. We'll also be recommending some pretty tasty bottles.
Yeah, so we should start by thanking the Adelaide Hills wine region for making this sponsored episode happen, giving us access to some fantastic producers and insider information. As ever with Wine Blast, the sponsorship is about airtime, not uncritical opinion, so we'll all be making up our own minds as we go. But we're quite excited about this one, I think it's fair to say, aren't we?
We really are. I mean, we've obviously known about Adelaide Hills for ages, and we've tasted various wines over the years, talked to winemakers, but I'm not sure it ever really came together in my mind until we had this chance to focus in on what it's actually all about. Compare a range of wines from across the region, chat with the producers, and really get under the skin of the place.
Yeah. It's funny how it goes with some places, isn't it? I mean, when I was over in South Australia last year, I kind of skirted round it, and it was this sort of enigmatic wine country up in the cooler, rainier hills above Adelaide City and the other major wine regions around it. Sort of like a magic wine garden. Everyone kept talking about it. And I tried a few wines that really made me sit up and pay attention. One was I remember a sort of beautiful, very perfumed, but also chalky Nebbiolo. And then we also together, didn't we, tried a Chardonnay that was incredibly invigorating and saline and elegant. And I thought, this seems like fun.
Okay, well, let's have some fun. And I think we should start by maybe setting the scene. The Adelaide Hills lies east of Adelaide City in South Australia. And we will put some maps in the show notes to keep you happy, Mr. Richards. It's quite a big wine region, isn't it? Stretching around 90 kilometres from the north to the south and 30 kilometres east to west. So it's far from uniform. But the key to the Adelaide Hills, as the name suggests, is altitude. All its vineyards are over 300 metres above sea level, and it sits in the shadow of Mount Lofty. So while it may lie geographically between McLaren Vale and Barossa Valley, the style of the wines are worlds apart.
But hang on, why are we setting the scene? There are far more qualified people to do that with us. So here's Kelly Wellington, winemaker at Harndorf Hill Winery.
Oh my goodness. It is a beautiful place. So the Adelaide Hills, as you come out of the Adelaide city, you rise up into the hills and suddenly you're surrounded by trees, by nature. You have elevation, you have cooler temperatures. And in South Australia, where you're spoiled with beautiful red winemaking country like the McLaren Vale, the Barossa Valley, Clare Valley, to pop yourself up into the hills and find somewhere that is just divine for making beautiful, crisp, aromatic whites. It's something special.
And here's how Pete Saturno, CEO of Longview Vineyard, puts it.
Adelaide Hills is a lot of things, and I'm a little bit biased, but I think it's probably one of the most exciting regions in Australia right now. It's a cool climate region and able to do lots of things very, very well. So we are able to do new and exciting varietals, new to Australia, and the traditional varietals extremely well, even though we're a very young region. And the region itself is about 70 kilometres long, so it's a big GI zone. And so what we like to say is it's sort of, there's a discovery around every corner. Every pocket tells a story in a way.
A discovery around every corner. That sounds a bit like a bumper sticker, doesn't it? But, you know,
or
it's
a
good one.
t-shirt
It's
logo.
a good one, yeah. But I think the key point is that, you know, while the Adelaide Hills is quite large and diverse and has a range of grapes and styles, it's fundamentally a cooler climate region. So, you know, these are wines with freshness and brightness.
Yeah, and just to drill into this altitude and what it means for the wines, here's Brian Crozer of Tapanapa in the Piccadilly Valley sub-region, a man central to the Adelaide Hills story.
It's a laughable altitude, really. I mean, Mount Lofty is all of, so named, 720 metres high. But between South Africa and Mount Lofty, there is nothing, anything higher. So all of the weather systems coming from the west hit Mount Lofty and rise up and dump their rain in the Piccadilly Valley behind Mount Lofty on the eastern side, the Sydney side of the mountain. So it has a 1.2 metre rainfall and has a climate temperature summation about the same as Burgundy. It's quite a special environment.
So the Adelaide Hills is cooler, rainier and higher altitude than the South Australian norm. And Brian explains that the cool is good because it pushes ripening into the autumn, giving the grapes longer to hang and develop complex flavours while retaining freshness. And the rain is good because it prevents excess stress or evapotranspiration in the vines, as long as you manage your vines and canopies properly to prevent disease.
Now, Tapanapa and its famous Tears vineyard is based, as we've said, in the Piccadilly Valley sub-region of Adelaide Hills, which has some of the region's highest, wettest and coolest vineyard land. As you move east and north, particularly within the hills, the rainfall drops and the temperatures rise as a very general rule of thumb. Climate is very localised within the Adelaide Hills, and vineyard sites can vary quite a lot depending on exact exposure, aspect and altitude. But this is how Brian Crozer sums up the general picture.
Adelaide Hills is a very varied environment. It's all cool climate, but you go from low temperature, high rainfall, as we are in the epicentre of the Adelaide Hills, out to the edges in the north, south and east, and they are much drier, much warmer, sort of Rhone Valley, Hermitage type temperatures and Bordeaux temperatures, north and south. So you really go from almost Champagne to Burgundy in the centre and out to those more red wine suited areas. So the Adelaide Hills is huge diversity and it's gradually filled in. But what it doesn't have is those mass vineyards of the Barossa Valley or McLaren Vale or Napa Valley or Willamette Valley. All the vineyards are scattered and they're in discrete places surrounded by forest and on the appropriate slopes.
Okay, so we're talking a patchwork of vines across a pretty varied landscape, generally small-scale viticulture, but all cool climate in a general sense. And we haven't got onto grape varieties and wine styles yet, but it's already sounding like quite a smorgasbord.
A proper Salmagundi. Now, here's Ashton Hills winemaker Liam Van Pelt on the Adelaide Hills.
It is a pretty special place. It's probably South Australia's premium wine growing region and one of the larger regions in South Australia. And we just have a huge diversity in sort of climate and soils and topography that really allows sort of quite a lot of varietals to be planted across the Adelaide Hills. So you've got everything from, sort of the newer varieties and Italians, sort of emerging things. And then you have sort of fairly traditional varieties, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Shiraz as well. So it's a beautiful region to work in and to visit.
Okay, but before we get into all that grape variety melee, and before people start throwing Salmagundi around, I think we should just look briefly at the history of the hills, because I think that'll help finish off the kind of context bit. And it's sort of a two-parter, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is originally Peremank and Ghana country. The first vines were planted in the Adelaide Hills in the 1840s by European settlers. Apparently, John Barton Hack sent his Adelaide Hills wine to Queen Victoria as a gift. Wine then made itself a home in the hills, with French-trained Edmund Mazur pioneering sparkling wine, both traditional method and sparkling Burgundy, as it was known, which was fizzy red made from Shiraz.
Apparently, by 1900, there were more than 200 grape growers in the central Mount Lofty ranges. But changing markets, taxation, and an economic depression meant that by the mid-20th century, almost all of the vineyards had made way for dairy, beef cattle, sheep, fruit orchards, and veg fields. But that's just the end of the first part.
Part 2, The Hills Strike Back, began in the late 1970s when Brian Croser and his wife Anne planted the Tears Vineyard in Piccadilly Valley. Told you he was important to this story. But how did Brian and Anne come to plant this vineyard in this place, which was by this time something of a wine wilderness?
When I came into the industry in 1970, the modern industry was just starting. And I ended up at the University of California at Davis and learnt that cool climate was really where you had to be if you wanted to make the best wines in the world. And that's what I intended to do. And Chardonnay had piqued our interest in California. It didn't exist in Australia at the time. And we decided to come back to the Adelaide Hills and and plant Chardonnay, because it's the coolest and wettest place in South Australia, one of the coolest and wettest places in Australia to grow Chardonnay.
So the next logical question is, why Chardonnay? What's so important about Chardonnay that would make the Crosers bet the house, as it were, on this variety? Well, it turns out the Crosers had fallen in love with it in California. And brace yourselves for a big opinion.
Chardonnay was a very different variety to all other white varieties and probably different to all red varieties. It had a texture and a presence that other varieties didn't have. And I've just made the declaration yesterday, which I've put off for a very long time, in my vintage report for 2026, that I think Chardonnay is the most interesting, best variety of all.
I love that. So Chardonnay is the best grape variety for you for wine.
Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. Other people will argue, of course.
I can feel the listener comments streaming in already, especially given I may well agree with him, you know. But others, of course, will definitely not.
Yeah, interesting. So I think either way, let's move swiftly on. It's probably the best thing, because there's an even better admission coming up. A bit of background first. When the Crosers were pioneering modern Adelaide Hills wine production, it was for Petaluma, a brand they'd launched, but which was later bought by booze conglomerate Lion Nathan. Some histories relate that the original aim was to make sparkling wine in the Adelaide Hills. But the truth is, there was some canny manoeuvring going on. Here's Brian Croser.
It's a subterfuge story, because Petaluma, the company I started, was making Chardonnay, and Australia's best Chardonnay and some of Australia's only Chardonnays, in the mid-70s through the 80s, from what I would now say quite unashamedly was unsuitable fruit from hot areas like Cowra in central New South Wales. And I had this dilemma, which I was in the Piccadilly Valley planting vines, knowing I wasn't going to produce a Piccadilly Valley Chardonnay for another 10 years. And in between now and then, I had to produce from these hot areas. So I came up with the story of making sparkling wine. So we planted the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir to make sparkling wine. But the real issue was I was waiting for enough Chardonnay and mature vines to make a proper cool climate Chardonnay. First time I've ever admitted that.
Well, we're privileged, Brian, and I love that. I love that. We love a good subterfuge story. So really, you were always focused on premium still Chardonnay.
Exactly. Yeah, very much so. And good sparkling wine. Yeah.
So here we are rewriting history on Wine Blast.
As ever,
I love
no?
that admission. Brian did add that his aim at the outset was to make a wine to rival the 1978 Domaine de la Romanée Conti Le Montrachet. So top-notch white Burgundy. But we'll talk a little bit more about his Chardonnay and sparkling wine more generally in a bit. For now, let's take a quick breather.
To recap so far, the Adelaide Hills is a cool climate wine region where there's a lot going on, despite its modern renaissance only starting in the early 1980s. Altitude is the key here, giving cooler temperatures and higher rainfall than surrounding areas. Chardonnay was the great variety the hills were refounded around, both for sparkling and still wines. So what's happened since?
Quite a bit, I think it's fair to say. But let's start by focusing on grape varieties, which we touched on earlier in the context of Adelaide Hills being a relatively diverse, cool climate region. David Lemire is a fellow Master of Wine and joint CEO of Shaw & Smith, which was set up by former Petaluma winemaker Martin Shaw and his cousin Michael Hill Smith, MW. Their first vintage was 1990, when David says the Adelaide Hills was an exciting, dynamic region, still finding out what worked best where. I asked David what grape varieties are currently working the best in the region.
There are a few, and we are blessed with a variety of sites, elevations, aspects, but there are two or three that have really risen to the top, and it's hard not to mention Chardonnay first, because the reputation of Chardonnay in the hills just goes from strength to strength. We've got a great combination of terroir that suits Chardonnay very well. We've got mature vines. We've got a lot of expertise both in the growing and the making now. So Chardonnay is particularly exciting. Shiraz is a bit of a dark horse in the Adelaide Hills. It does beautifully well, and a cooler climate style of Shiraz. We've also had success with Pinot Noir just in the particular sites that Pinot loves. It's finicky, as we know. And Sauvignon Blanc has also, become this variety in the hills where it makes something that is its own style. It's a New World style of Sauvignon Blanc. It has this varietal definition and vibrancy, and sits somewhere in between that sort of New Zealand impact of Sauvignon Blanc and the Loire Valley restraint. So it's a lovely style.
So you've mentioned Chardonnay, Shiraz, Pinot, Sauvignon. Are there any other varieties that you would flag up as being particularly exciting or potentially exciting in Adelaide Hills?
Yes, we are playing with Gamay, which we think has got some really good potential. It's quite interesting for us, and but there are also plantings of Gruner Veltliner that people have been working with in the hills for more than a decade now, and that's quite exciting. But Shaw & Smith, we're a little bit more focused on the classics in our region, but it's great to see a region with people experimenting and having a go with different things. Yeah.
So just to bring in a few stats, you know me, I can't help myself.
You love your stats. I was wondering when we were going to get some stats, but here we go.
I've restrained myself
not
so
too
far.
many, not too many.
But, so there are 3,671 hectares of vines in the Adelaide Hills. So pretty small, I think we'd fair to say, compared to, for example, 11,000 hectares in the Barossa Valley. 58% of the vineyard in the Adelaide Hills is white, and the biggest plantings are, in order, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Shiraz.
Now, I think most people recognise Chardonnay as the standard bearer in the Adelaide Hills, particularly from the Piccadilly Valley, and also Lenswood, which is the other official GI sub-region within the Adelaide Hills, slightly warmer and less rainy than the Piccadilly Valley, so gives more generous styles. Here's Xavier Bizot, who's originally from a Champagne family, but now runs Terre à Terre and Daosa Sparkling with Lucy Crozer, his wife, and Brian's daughter. He's also co-manager with Lucy of Tapanapa, whose centrepiece is the Tears Vineyard.
I think the hero of the Adelaide Hills, and includes Piccadilly Valley, is Chardonnay. And Chardonnay, I think, but I'm biased in saying that, I think we grow the best Chardonnay in the Adelaide Hills in the Piccadilly Valley. There are some very good Chardonnay made in Lenswood as well in the Adelaide Hills. Some very good Chardonnays made in Balhana, and in other parts of the hills, which are, close to where we are, so slightly warmer. But it's really the hero for table wine and production.
How would you define a great Adelaide Hills or Piccadilly Valley Chardonnay, talking about still wine?
Okay, so I have a benchmark, which is the Thiers Vineyard, which I've moved in Australia in 2005, and being the arrogant Frenchman, I arrived with my preconceived ideas about the fact that the French were making the best wine in the world, and there was actually no way that New World winemakers could do anything. They're just contenders and outsiders. But then very quickly, I changed my mind tasting the Thiers Vineyard Chardonnay immediately, and especially tasting it against French Chardonnays. The main thing that strikes me is consistently a fruit expression in the Thiers Vineyard Chardonnay and in a lot of the Piccadilly Chardonnays, which really dominates. So there's no, kind of grassy, cabbagey characters, which you can have in Burgundy. Burgundy has, I think, sometimes even in Grand Cru level, can have wines that are a bit too tight and too green, and so there's your answer for me. And it's not limited to Tapanapa. It's all the very good Adelaide Hills Chardonnay. You see the fruit. For the Thiers Vineyard, you see, as you would have seen tasting it, the white peach, stone fruit, very, very good, a little bit of grapefruit, citrus, but mostly it's the length and the texture, which I think is winning for me for this wine. And so I'm not spending too much money buying Grand Cru Burgundy anymore.
I'm not entirely sure who is buying Grand Cru Burgundy.
Not us.
To be honest.
I can tell you that for
Not
now.
us. There's lots to go around.
Without a doubt.
And we have indeed been tasting the Thiers, and we'll report back shortly. So we heard there what makes Thiers or prime Piccadilly Valley Chardonnay special. So what about a different kind of Chardonnay from the Adelaide Hills? I asked this of Emma Wood, head winemaker at Wirra Wirra, which is based in McLaren Vale, but sources Chardonnay from the hills, including the Yandra Vineyard from Lenswood.
I think because of the diversity in these individual sites, I think you can get quite a lot of complexity and don't have to just rely on whether it's cloned alone or rainfall or any one particular thing. I think it's a real combination. And I guess if you have the opportunity to blend that, I think that's really interesting how you can get flavour, you can get beautiful acidity, you can get different parts from across the hills.
And talk to us a bit about Lenswood. What is it that makes Lenswood itself special and different within an Adelaide Hills context?
I guess for me, it's all about the sites within that. So it's the second coolest sub-region of the hills. But for me, the sites that we work with have a particular aspect and I guess there's something special about them. So one in particular is our Yandra Vineyard, and that is east facing. So not only is it the second coolest part of the hills, it also faces east. So it's the morning sun for us down here in the southern hemisphere. And I also love it even more because of the high natural acidity. So that helps my job. But it's not a fancy clone. It's not a fancy setup. It's nothing like close planted. It was planted in 1998 for sparkling. But I think true sites really deliver quality. When it's the right site with the right variety, I don't think some of those things matter if it's managed to its potential.
So you've worked in Tasmania, you've worked in Victoria, some pretty exciting, cooler climate Australian regions. How would you compare Adelaide Hills to in that cool climate context of Australia?
It's probably slightly warmer than those ones, but I think what it delivers is, I guess what I'm striving to do is pick it before that heaviness from the fruit comes in. So that is its challenge. But I also think with the evolution of Chardonnay, particularly in Australia, I was part of that for so many years where we sort of went and made skeletal wine Chardonnays And now we're coming back into the middle. And I think Adelaide Hills plays exactly where we want to be. It has flavour and texture, but complexity. So I think I'm hopeful that everyone loves it as much as we do.
So less extreme Chardonnay winemaking, more moderate Chardonnay winemaking.
Yeah, or maybe more thoughtful, perhaps, less formula.
Thoughtful Chardonnay making. I love that. And apparently Emma is with Brian on Chardonnay being her all-time favourite grape variety too. So there are a few of us.
There are, aren't there?
Like Xavier, she also calls Chardonnay the hero of the Adelaide Hills. And it's interesting how she talks about how the hills give freshness, but also flavour and texture.
Yeah, I mean, she refers to skeletal Chardonnays. Just to put that in context, back in the day, Australia was criticised for making big, rich, buttery, sickly Chardonnay. So then producers kind of went to the other extreme, apparently picking even before sparkling bases. And the wines were sometimes just really lean and austere, which is what Emma's talking about. But it seems that the hills offer kind of a thoughtful, less formulaic alternative, she said.
Okay, so Chardonnay appears to be the star of the show in the hills, but it's far from the only grape in town. Pinot Noir is used alongside Chardonnay for sparkling wines, but it's also made as a red, the pioneer being Stephen George, who founded Ashton Hills in the northern end of the Piccadilly Valley in 1983 on a south-facing slope. I asked current winemaker Liam Van Pelt how it all works.
You know, the climate that we have, cool climate, lots of rainfall, you know, quite humid. It's perfectly suited to Pinot Noir. There's also an element of it is sort of this cross section where everything just aligns. The fruit that we get off the vineyard just has, you know, superb sort of density in its flavour profile. You know, the wines have lovely aromatics and purity to them. They always seem to have a beautiful texture and a real sort of heart and soul to them. And that has to be, I'm not religious at all, but there just has to be something about that site being, you know, just where everything sort of meets and becomes perfect. There's just an element of magic in there, I suppose.
And so what is then the secret to making great Pinot Noir at Ashton Hills?
I wish I knew, because then I could do it every year. I think it's a sense of trusting the process and knowing when to step in and interfere and when to just let things go. We very much like to sort of play a hands-off role, and that doesn't mean that we're not watching things, or we're not sort of carefree or laissez-faire about anything. We are intently watching, you know, all our ferments and the fruit on the vine and things like that. But you know, I think to make great wine that has a sort of heart and soul, you have to let the fruit sort of take its journey, and, you know, we're just there to sort of gently guide it if things go awry.
And I know you make a range of Pinots, but is there, and they're all different, but is there something that sort of links them all together?
I think the thing that I would like to see thread them together, and I hope that comes through, is that they all have a beautiful texture about them. And that they all have, you know, a lovely sort of set of tannins amongst them. And, you know, I think that the thing that sort of we historically see with the wines that come from the Ashton estate is that, you know, with a bit of age, there's often this beautiful sort of bone broth or umami sort of character, mushroom, that comes out quite strong in the wines that sort of threads those wines together. But yeah, I think for me, the most important thing on the set of Pinots is that they all have a sort of beautiful texture and tannin profile.
Interesting, we're talking about texture with both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Yeah. And they've trialled a lot of different clones at Ashton Hills, 26, in fact, over the years, apparently. And Liam says it's important to have clonal diversity in order to build that complexity in Pinot Noir. I think vine age also helps. He's another one who's making Gamay, incidentally. His first vintage was 2022, and he says he's aiming for a kind of Cru Beaujolais style with fragrance, but also weight and density.
Interesting. He also, if I remember rightly, flagged up Italian varieties as being exciting in the hills, including Nebbiolo. Now, one producer that specialises in Italian varieties is Longview Vineyard in Macclesfield in the east of the hills, the Saturno family having northern Italian heritage. They also grow Gruner Veltliner, a variety more closely associated with Austria. Here's CEO Pizza Turno?
Yeah, Gruner Veltliner was one that we came about with the rest of the region, and now we have more. Well, the Adelaide Hills has as much Gruner planted anywhere outside of Austria in the world, and it just we started this with Harndorf Hill, who has the original plantings, and those guys really wanted to build up Gruner, and so we came together. They said we want a southern vineyard and a northern vineyard to be involved. And next thing you know, we had 10 or 15 growers, and we came together with those growers to talk about how to market it, how the style is, and how we're going to educate people on it. Now, it's a very impressive but important variety to the Adelaide Hills.
You talk about exciting varieties, maybe slightly alternative varieties. How is it, on the one hand, making them, and on the other hand, selling them?
That's a great question. It's always exciting making them, or if you're looking at a variety like Barbera, it's a pain in the ass. So we did with all of our research. It is we thought Nebbiolo was difficult, and it is, and then Barbera just knocks it out of the park. And I think it's one of those things. It always seems very exciting to plant a new variety, but you have to have a plan for it, and that's also because it's hard to educate the consumers. It takes a long time. And, we're very lucky that we're warm enough to grow Nebbiolo, and it's just too cool in those higher sites. And, it is a unique little spot. But we grow fantastic Riesling, in fact. And so it's quite different to the Clare Valley. And, in fact, the most famous wine Riesling maker in Egon Müller chooses to make his Riesling from the Adelaide Hills. So that's a good one.
Egon Müller, indeed. Perhaps one of the biggest names in Germany and Riesling, now making wine in the Adelaide Hills. So, a lot to get your head around. Nebbiolo is really interesting because, as we know, many dreams around the world have been sacrificed at the altar of Nebbiolo over the years. But, whisper it. The Adelaide Hills may be cracking it.
That would be quite something, wouldn't it? And another thing, of course, is Gruner Veltliner, which Pete mentioned alongside Harndorf Hill, a producer that was founded with the aim of specialising in Austrian varieties. Now, Gruner is something of a speciality for them, as winemaker Kelly Wellington explains.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting niche to be in. It's very exciting, and we certainly find that with the couple of aspects that we have at the Harndorf Hill site and the few clones that we have, there's quite a lot that we can do. So imagining that site has been particularly chosen to suit Gruner, and knowing that we've got those cool nights and those sunshiny days, you really have a good scope for chasing varying degrees of ripeness and different types of flavour expression within the one grape. So Gruner Veltliner can be very fruitful, very primary, super aromatic, and it's known to have its own spice and pepper as well. If you can chase a wine that has that sort of freshness, you've got an opportunity as well to build something that has a bit of structure and body. So with the fruit that we have on our property, we can do different things like chase purely aromatic. So we've got a wine called White Mischief that's almost styled like a New World Sauvignon Blanc. It's that fruitful. We have our Cru, which brings in elements of texture and fermentation savouriness as well, and you can see a bit of old oak. So the wine handles all those things really well, but in that package of something that has freshness and structure from natural acidity. And then we can do a reserve style as well, which can be left on the vine for a little bit longer. It's a little bit more rich and powerful in its Gamay and its alcohol, but because of that enduring acid profile, you can ferment it in barrel and do some great things with it too, much in the style of a Chardonnay, I guess, just with a different varietal start point.
Now, you also have a field blend of, I think, 12 interplanted white varieties, which is quite fun. You can tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's truly unique. It is 12 varieties. They're set up in 2 or 3 panels, so it'll change from Riesling to Gruner to Pinot Gris to Hazelblüt to Riesling. There's a bit of everything in there. It's wild. And I think truly the beautiful idea of it is that once you add all those varieties in together, there's this idea that they're all communicating under the soil. So they've got shared mycorrhiza, they've got shared soil, and they're experiencing the same climate and aspect. And the communication between vines and the sharing of resources actually brings them closer together in their ripening than they would be as individual blocks. Once you have so many varieties there in a blend, and it's a field blend and a true field blend, so it is all harvested together. Once you have so many varieties in there together, you're no longer looking at variety, you're looking at site. It's an expression of site, and it is wonderful. The features of the field blend, the freshness and some of the aromatics, and even the textures, I find it's a really amplified expression of the things that I see, elsewhere in the vineyard. It's such a wine of sight. It's a thing to behold.
So many intriguing things going on in the Adelaide Hills. On which note, one other thing I wanted to pick up on is sparkling. As we said, it was part of the Adelaide Hills history and refounding story, and it remains important in the region. Dausa is Xavier Bizot and Lucy Croz's project. They make a range of different styles in the Piccadilly Valley. They're all traditional method, so in the champagne mould. I asked Xavier to tell us more about sparkling wine in the hills.
Piccadilly Valley is a very cool climate area. We source fruit from vineyards that are between 450 meters altitude and 600 meters altitude. Piccadilly Valley climate is slightly warmer than Champagne, but very marginal, cooler than Burgundy, and it's the perfect area to grow sparkling wine. And then why did I choose it? I didn't choose. I just followed my wife, and then I've been happy to live here ever since. And I wouldn't move back to Champagne, to be honest. I think it's such a great. The more I stay here, the more we make wine, the more I'm convinced of the huge potential of Piccadilly Valley for high-end sparkling wine.
So turning to the actual style of sparkling wine then, when you taste it, when we taste these wines, these sparkling wines of yours, what makes the taste or the style unique or different in a global sparkling wine context?
Well, I'll use the overused word in the world of wine, the word terroir. So it's very different soils, very different geology to Champagne. So we make wines, our style, especially in the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir, we make fruitier styles, sparkling base wines. But we have very good acidity because of the climate and because of the rainfall. So, and the other thing is, in terms of differences, we tend to harvest later than, we really try to get rid of, because we're very small region. We source fruit from still 40 different blocks, but we have control on all those, and we harvest them at full ripeness. We are not guided by logistical constraint. We really harvest at optimum ripeness and getting rid of all the green characters and really focusing on ripe fruit characters and all that, retaining a very good acid. So it's quite a unique space, a place to grow sparkling wine.
So characterful sparkling wines with pristine, ripe fruit, but also good freshness. And no going back to Champagne for him. That's off the menu as well as Grand Cru Burgundy. I mean,
but we've got Adelaide Hills.
We do. He does. And, I think quality sparkling wine is definitely a strong feature of the Adelaide Hills portfolio.
Now, talking about the different wine styles from the hills, one thing we have to flag up is the vibrant natural wine scene in the region. It ties into the pioneer spirit and creative flair of the hills, and it took off in the noughties around an enclave in the Western Hills called Basket Range. So you asked Pete Saturno about the hills' reputation for being trendy and creative.
I think it's a dynamic region that people can really express themselves in, and also there's no preconceived ideas about it as well. So we're not locked into what people just assume, and that was really driven by the natural wine movement and the guys in Basket Range. And whether or not you like their wines or not. They've done a fantastic job of putting the Adelaide Hills on the map, and as has more of the conventional wineries like Shaw and Smith and the Lane and whatnot. So, we've got it all here, and it's a really exciting place to be as well.
I was going to say, I mean, how do the natural wine and conventional wine scenes sit happily alongside one another? How does that dynamic work? Because sometimes they can be in sort of direct opposition, can't they?
Absolutely. I actually think early on it was probably, a little more disjointed. But I think now, as everybody has been in the game for such a long time, and we've crossed paths, and like things in the wine industry, everybody gets on well with each other, regardless of style or whatever they think. And so, yeah, it's. I think there's a mutual respect there, and I think everyone's doing some exciting things, regardless of what style you make.
And here's what David Lemire had to say.
Yeah, I think we're pretty lucky. We're not far from the city. You've got the main winemaking school in Australia there. You've got young people, who are keen to experiment and try different things. And that might be different varieties. It might be more lo-fi winemaking. But there is this culture of small batches, experimentation, and that's a really healthy part of it, I think. I think it's been, a positive driver that has driven interest in the region. And, we've seen people coming and, again, that sense of how can we do things a bit differently and push the boundaries, and natural winemaking has been a part of that. So, yeah, I think it's part of this tapestry in the hills, which, does have diversity to it.
Talking to winemakers in the hills, they do often admit that the natural wine scene has not only broadened their audience, it's also prompted them to reassess their own winemaking, reducing intervention and pushing boundaries, as David says. So that's positive.
Yeah. So we've talked about varieties and styles. Before we move on, should we just briefly flag up a few wines we've tasted?
Yeah, I think very briefly, I think we should. I think we'll put the bulk of our recommendations in our show notes because we've still got quite a bit of ground to cover. But in terms of the wines, I loved the Daosa Natural Reserve Fizz. It's Pinot dominant and really characterful. The Tapanapa Tears 1.5 M Vineyard Chardonnay 2025, very toasty, bright, intense. Ashton Hills, I loved their Reserve Chardonnay 2025, which was a bit more smoky, steely, citric. And also, oh gosh, their Bauhaus Single Vineyard Pinot Noir 2025. I love this gamey, sort of elegantly bittersweet style. Two wines from the Lenswood sub-region I really enjoyed were the Wirra Wirra Yandra Vineyard Lenswood Chardonnay 2025. That was savoury and mealy and very classy. And the Shaw & Smith Lenswood Vineyard Chardonnay 2023. It was a bit more nutty, mineral, restrained. But finally, last but not least for me, I loved the floral, meaty Shaw & Smith Balhana Vineyard Shiraz 2022. It had those firm tannins, but bold syrup flavours. Oh, lovely smoky bacon style.
Yeah, really, really nice. I'm just sort of juggling bottles here. Party one. So, that's quite a rundown. Well done. I'd flag up the Harndorf Hill Gruner Veltliner 2025. Really nice texture and succulence, quite foody. I also like the Longview Gruner 2025, which has a sort of similar sort of roasted lemon, leesy character. Again, good value. Also like the Longview's Cabernet Sauvignon 2023. It's a fresher style of Cabernet, maybe not for everyone, but sort of earthy and bell pepper style, but I really like that freshness. In terms of the Chardonnays, whereas Yandra was excellent, I agree. And I also like their sort of toasty, appley, sort of good value 12th man Chardonnay 2025.
That was a really good value shout.
I did like the Shaw & Smith M3 2024. I mean, that's been a perennial favourite of ours, hasn't it? But it's a sort of creamy, leesy, smoky style. But then the Tapanapa Tears Chardonnay 2025 was just epic. How to describe this wine? It's quite erudite, I think. It's mineral, it's layered, it's vivid, it's intense is what it is. Takes no prisoners. Yes, the acidity is electric, but give it time. has sensational gravitas and intensity.
It's a wine you have to sort of take time over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, truly, yeah.
And then, but what great wine isn't? And then finally, I marginally preferred the Dauser Blanc de Blanc 2021. Very classy, pithy, sort of chiseled and elegant fizz. Really nice.
So what didn't really work for you? Anything at all?
Yeah, I had to admit, I had a bit of a question mark about the Pinots for me personally.
In general, yeah?
Yeah, I just found there to be a sort of slightly underlying jammy character in there sometimes, lacking sort of real focus for me. I kind of found them a bit diffuse in the palate. Now, I'm aware other people might find that, they might appreciate a more generous style of Pinot. I personally have a hunch that other reds may prove better in the hills, ultimately.
I was pretty impressed
But I
with
was going to say, I know that you were impressed with
really
some of the
was.
Pinots, I may well be wrong on this. What about you? What would you say?
Well, I think some of the more esoteric styles just didn't quite land for me. I love people being a bit crazy with wine, but I think some of them were just a bit either too simple or a bit too weird, frankly. I totally agree. It's good to experiment and push boundaries. But I think some of these wines and styles really do have a limited shelf life in the hills. I just think you look at the quality in the Chardonnay and the Shiraz and the sparkling, and you think, that's the future.
Okay, well, that's quite enough of our tasting notes, and we'll put a list of recommendations on our show notes so you can see those. You can go and check those out.
You can indeed. But it's interesting doing a tasting like this because it ties into what we were saying about the diversity across the Adelaide Hills. Sean Smith's Shiraz comes from Balhana in the lower part of the hills, which proved a bit too warm apparently for their Pinot Noir, so they replaced it with Shiraz, and you get this beautiful, as I've said, cool climate, spicy style that's just gorgeous. I mean, David says, it's the dark horse in the hills, but I could see this cool climate style being really successful.
Yeah, and keeping with Shaw and Smith, their M3 Chardonnay is also a blend, not just Piccadilly Valley and Lenswood, but also Lobertal, or Loberthal, which gives extra density. So you do get a sense of this sort of complexity coming from diversity of site, as it were. I mean, Brian Crozer says that Australia is much more focused on vineyard wines rather than winemaker wines these days. And that's why, in his modest view, Australian Chardonnay is the best New World Chardonnay. There you go.
Never knowingly understated, Brian. Anyway, we talked about diversity, didn't we? And touched on that in our tasting too. But one of the challenges in the Adelaide Hills that people flagged up was that it's hard to convey a simple message or easily communicable summary about a region that has so much diversity, from Chardonnay to Pinot to Shiraz to Sauvignon to Gamay to Gruner to Nebbiolo to sparkling to natural. It's just not straightforward, is it? Not like Burgundy with Chardonnay and Pinot or Margaret River with Chardonnay and Cabernet.
No, but the simplicity's overrated, I find, in life. No, I don't know, but maybe it's all just part of a process, an evolution. As we've said, this is still a relatively young region, but with tremendous potential. I asked Brian Crozer what he thought would be successful in Adelaide Hills in 50 years' time.
Well, it'd certainly be Chardonnay number one, and only out of the cooler parts. It'll be sparkling wine out of those cooler parts from Pinot and Chardonnay and Pinot Meunier. But the rest of, I think there is a real opportunity around the fringes of the Adelaide Hills on the edge of the Murray Plain to grow some of Australia's best Shiraz. So I think it'll be a bipolar thing. It'll be, and in the end, it may not even all be called Adelaide Hills. It may be called the Mount Barker Hills and the Mount Lofty Hills. But the Mount Lofty certainly suited to sparkling wine, Chardonnay. And then on the outer edges of the hills, I think Shiraz and Viognier are really, really very special.
Some heavyweight backing for Adelaide Hills Shiraz there.
Yeah.
And maybe a further subdivision of the region in the future. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, talking of the future, we did touch on sustainability and things like regenerative viticulture, which Harndorf Hill are adopting to build soil health and vine resilience.
I don't think it's the easiest area to be organic or biodynamic given the climate, but Shaw and Smith are going down the organic route. You asked David how that's been.
The vineyards that we've owned for the longest, which are Balhana and Lenswood, are fully certified organic, and the others on the way. It's been great. It's been a really good learning process. And for us, it's about, it adds to what we're trying to do, which is to really prioritise soil health and vine health. And by doing that, that's flowing through to wine quality. So, organics is not an end in itself for us. For us, it's a tool to help us achieve better soil health. That's where it really all begins. So, it's an important pursuit for us.
I mean, as you said, this is quite a wet region. What are the challenges of organics?
It can be challenging in some of the wetter years. You do really need to be very detailed with the work in the vineyard. I think seeing things before they happen and, keeping the vineyard in good shape for when things are wet is really important. But it's a pretty cool thing in a challenging region to work in this way. It's early days, but there's also a lot of interest in regenerative farming, and we're really interested in that. So I think we're trying not to be too dogmatic. We like that discipline of certification, but it's not the be all and end all. We've got to be farming sensitively and sustainably, and that's just one part of it.
Another producer said it's not easy going organic in a region where, for example, fruit producers can be quite wedded to conventional practices. That's just the culture. But the key is, I think, to show how it can be done, lead by example, try to make that kind of approach mainstream.
So maybe something that will change in the future. Something else that's helping producers be sustainable, this time in a commercial sense, but also tied to the importance of place, is wine tourism. This is a big thing in the Adelaide Hills. Kelly Wellington sums it up quite nicely.
It's too good not to go. It's too, it's too accessible. It's too beautiful. It's too diverse. You can't not go.
And actually, if you look at somewhere like Longview, it has quite the visitor setup, with luxury accommodation, a spa, cellar door and restaurant.
Yeah.
Anyway, here's Pete Saturno's take on wine tourism in the hills.
Yeah, it's very important to us, and we come from a family of hospitality, and we're a big wedding venue, and it's been a really important part of our business to ride through the tough times. However, it takes a lot of work. It takes the right people, and it's not easy. And so in this day and age, where it really bodes well for us and people with great restaurants and cellar doors in the Adelaide Hills and the surrounds is people want a place. They want a sense of place, and that's what we have, and that's why we love people coming up and experiencing the site. It's because it makes sense when they're there, and it's and I think that's what consumers want now. It's not just the go to the supermarket, get a bottle of wine. They want a story. They want to know where it comes from and how it's grown. That's what I think as well, and that's what I'm passionate about.
Interesting that Pete touched there on tough times, because these are challenging times for wine producers, aren't they, the world over? And neither Australia nor Adelaide Hills is immune. We asked people for their views on the future, and quite a few said that Australian wine will probably shrink in volume, especially at the lower end, but should focus on the good stuff, which of course plays to Adelaide Hill's strengths. Brian Crozer said the future for Australia is to be more fine wine oriented, less volume, more dollars. I asked him about the future of wine in general, as consumption trends and health advice is seemingly turning against wine.
Wine has been a cultural adjunct to life forever. It brings geography and culture, different cultures, to life in your living room, dining room, around friends and meals. I don't think that's going to alter. But if you want to drink something intrinsically interesting, complex, fascinating, make your brain work over time, then drink fine wine.
What's the future for the Adelaide Hills, Brian?
That, I think its future is to provide the very highly varied stories and present the varied Adelaide Hills geography in a glass, so people in London, in New York, wherever, can understand there is this place called the Adelaide Hills, and it has these varied environments and various varied winemakers and different attitudes, and that it's producing these wonderful, thought-provoking wines.
The Adelaide Hills in a glass. I have that right in front of me, and I can confirm it is indeed wonderful and thought-provoking.
And conversation-provoking as we're rabbiting on about all this stuff. I asked Pete Saturno about the future of the hills.
I think the future is certainly a lot of tourism, but I think it's some of these exciting new varietals that we're doing, better than anyone else in the country. And it's not to say that they're better than the old world styles. They're different, and that's what we love. And give you an example of Nebbiolo. There's wonderful Nebbiolo all over Italy, and they're different styles. They're not just like Barolo. The Veltliner, the Alto Piemonte, doing exceptional wines, and they look very, very different, and they tell a different story. And so that's what we're doing. We're just telling a different story, and making things as varietally specific as possible. And I think that's exciting. I think people they don't want to drink like their dads. They want to try new things, and I think that's where we're moving into now.
I don't want to drink like my dad. Do you? Do we all? I don't know. I know what he means.
I don't think so.
Basically, I know what he means, and I guess that's the interesting thing about the Adelaide Hills. You've got all this classical stuff like the grown-up Chardonnay and Shiraz and Fizz, but then you've got all this new wave crazy kit like the Nebbiolos and the Gruners and cool climate Shiraz and natural and field blends, and that's really exciting. A final word on the future from Xavier Bizot.
I think Adelaide Hills has a great future. I think both because it has pockets like Piccadilly Valley and Lenswood as well, and a couple of other places that have found their voice, that have found their that are working. They are definitely on the road of fine wine and trying to perfect what they're doing. They're on the long voyage of centuries of perfecting viticulture and understanding how to improve.
So a region finding its voice and on the path of perfecting a fine wine formula. I think that's a fitting note to end on. The road ahead. Yeah. Do you want to give us a closing summary?
Sure. There's a lot going on in the Adelaide Hills, and taking time to appreciate the diversity of styles and excitement in the wines is well worth it. From finely etched, invigorating Chardonnay to spicy, elegant Shiraz and complex sparkling, these are cool climate wines that benefit from the mitigating effects of altitude and a multitude of different terroirs to bring complexity and nuance. A region known for being dynamic and where people can really express themselves, to quote one producer, is always going to defy easy categorization or summary. Better to say, check it out. See what you make of it and its wonderful, thought-provoking wines.
Now there's an invitation. Thanks to our interviewees Brian Crozer, David Lemire, Emma Wood, Kelly Wellington, Liam Van Pelt, Pete Saturno and Xavier Bizot. Thank you to the Adelaide Hills wine region, and thanks to you for listening. Until next time, cheers.